There may be times in your website content where you want to signify a quote or give credit where credit is due. Let's begin by looking at two ways to express direct quotations. The first is a quotation or Q element. This is a fantastic way to set a short quote apart from the text around it. Quotations are simply created by wrapping text with Q tags. If you're displaying a longer quote and want it to stand out even more, you should consider using the block quote element. Browsers will usually indent this element and add a line before and after to make it pop. The block quote accepts a cite attribute so that you can give credit to the owner of the quote. Save this out and take a look at the output. The changes are fairly subtle now, but declaring your quotes in your markup will make it easy to style them and make them really stand out when using CSS later. Let's change gears for a moment and talk about some less intuitive elements that you might want to include in your markup: abbreviations and definitions. You can spell out the whole meaning of an abbreviation or acronym by using the abbreviation or ABBR element. For example, you may want to use the acronym HTML in your text, but want the user to know that it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. To do this, wrap the word HTML in abbreviation tags and add a title attribute to the abbreviation element. Set this title to Hypertext Markup Language. When a user mouses over the word HTML, a tooltip will show besides the mouse cursor saying Hypertext Markup Language. Let's save and take a quick look at the abbreviation in action before moving on. Notice that mousing over the word will show the abbreviation or acronym spelled out in its entirety, as defined by the title attribute. Now let's say that you would prefer to look at the word HTML as a term that needs to be defined, rather than an abbreviation that needs to be spelled out. If you have several term and definition pairs on your page already, it might be a good idea to not get caught up on semantics. HTML also has the element called a definition or DFN element. Alone, it works exactly the same as the abbreviation element. Let's just change the ABBR tags to DFN tags. Before viewing the result in the browser, let's create two more examples of the definition element. The first variation is very simple. Just remove the title attribute and define the term in its parent. This will style the definition the same way as before, but will not require the user to mouse over and wait for the definition to be displayed. The last variation is to create an abbreviation element and wrap the abbreviation element in definition tags. The definition element will inherit the title attribute of the abbreviation element, so it's once again not necessary to set the title attribute of the definition. The definition will borrow it from its child abbreviation. Now that we have three variations of the definition element, let's save out and see the results. Take a moment to explore the mouse over effects and try to understand where all the information is coming from. To round out this lecture, let's look at just two more elements. First off, let's take a look at the address element. The address element is very similar to the paragraph element. Just write an address and wrap it with the address tags. Keep in mind that the address element, like the paragraph element, does not preserve white space. You'll need to hardcode any line breaks or multiple spaces. Like the paragraph element, the address element will usually insert a line before and after the block. Lastly, there's a cite element to define a title of work. Just wrap some text inside of cite tags to make a cite element. Most browsers will display cite elements as italic text. Save and view. You may be wondering why bother using the elements that we talked about in this lecture. The browser doesn't really make these elements stand out very much, and in the case of abbreviations, there's no change in appearance at all. Defining these elements now in your HTML is important because when you go back to style your web page, CSS will work in a way that can select and style all elements of the same type. For example, having all of your definitions defined in the HTML will allow you to change the appearance of all definitions with one line of code. This once and done philosophy will make it much easier to edit and improve your code later.